Hello, everyone. My name is Miriam, and thank you for attending my class today. I'll promise not to be too embarrassing. We'll say I'm an R a lot, but other than that, I probably will. I am a laurel in Middle Eastern embroidery, specifically for Mamluk embroidery, and I didn't start knowing it. I am self-taught, and it's been a long time, but yeah. So you're probably wondering, who were the Mamluks? So let me just get this started. I shall share my screen. It'll be lovely. There we go. Ta-da! Big one. Okay. So the Mamluks were slaves that from the 9th century onwards came out from Eastern Europe and the Turkic regions that were brought in as tip-top slaves who were soldiers trained from childhood all the way up until adulthood, where they are freed, and then they were expected to be fiercely loyal to their leaders. They were considered crack soldiers, and a lot of the time, they were the ones who swung battles in favor of the people who won. So the Mamluks did kill off Outremer, which was the last of the Crusader states. They created a lot of ties to Venetians through their trade through what's that? Crete. Was it Crete? I think it was Crete. One of the islands they shipped out to there, and from there the Venetians took over. They ruled Egypt from 1250 to 1570, when they fell to the Ottomans. Now, they didn't completely vanish, though, because then they became the administrators for Egypt under the Ottomans. So they're not completely gone. So when we're talking about Mamluk embroidery textiles, pretty much everything is labeled as being found in Fustat. Now, Fustat was the capital of Egypt, very old, created back in 1641. But it was eventually burnt to the ground when the Crusaders decided to try and go and invade. They literally started pulling it down brick by brick to stop it. The scorched earth policy, I believe it was, that we call it nowadays. So Cairo, which is the now capital of Egypt, was founded by the Fatimid dynasty. Eventually, it actually expanded to encapsulate Fustat. So, and it became Old Cairo. And it became the rubbish ground. It had already been destroyed by themselves, very run down, kind of rubbishy area. However, nowadays it's got a massive heritage listing on there because of the amount that you can find in there. So going back to where you start from, a lot of these collections were created in the 20th century. Now, in the 20th century, there was the Tutankhamun fever, which means everyone was investing in Egypt and Egyptology. So they were going out there to try and find a lot of ancient finds, but it was just not just the only thing that you could find. There is a massive history of medieval Egypt in the way as well. So the main one that I normally focus on is from the Ashmalean Museum. These were created by the Newberries, that collection. A lot of them, Essie herself was involved in setting up the Royal School of Needlework, which is still around today, very high. They take care of the Royal Embroidery Collection. And she was even involved in sewing up the textiles that were found in Tutankhamun's tomb, such as his curtains. So we've also got a lot of other collections that were happening from the same people that they were working with, such as Hewitt Myers and the Benaki Museum, etc., etc. So this one is not a Mamluk piece. This one is a very early tiraz piece. Tiraz, Persian word, just meaning embroidery, very simple. However, by the time it did spread all the way out to Egypt, it had a specific meaning, meaning embroidered blessings, quotes from the Quran that were gifts from the Caliph. This one here, I can tell you in a moment what the meaning is. It's off to the side. But these tiraz are wonderful in that they also put in the years. So there is an actual full-on date for this one, which is why we can say that it was made between literally within 2-year time period. We can age that one. Now this one here, I can't even see what it says, but it's a very early one. And as you can see, elephants, we've got lots of colors, and I'm not quite sure what this one is meant to be here, but I do love the pink elephants. Now, this one is a pseudo-tiraz, looking at the later 10th century. We've got ducks, we've got things that look like writing, which is hence the pseudo part. It's meant to look like a tiraz, which is a royal gift. It's a way of looking like you've got something when you haven't got something. But as you can see, all the different stitches used, it looks like we've got split stitch, perhaps running stitch, maybe some chain in there as well, but lots of colors. So we've also got long-armed cross stitch, which is another counted one, satin stitch, stem stitch, split stitch, pattern darning was a thing now, which in many, what we know, it looks like ribbons woven in, but it's not dissimilar to an old dot matrix printer. So they do a stitch, drop a line, do another stitch, drop a line, and therefore no return. So as you can see, this one here has got tiraz, and it's the Ayyubid period. Now, Ayyubid period is what they call Saladin and his family's time when he took over running from the Fatimids. Now, Saladin was a Kurd or a Turkic person who really started relying very heavily on the Mamluks and the soldiers. And in many ways, they became his Praetorian Guard, which, much like the history of the actual Praetorian Guard, effectively took over. So they took over in 1270, and not only were they very warlike and with Baibars and a few other of their caliphs promising to completely get rid of the Crusader state, which they did. They ramped up their embroideries and exports. So embroideries and other textiles became their second biggest import behind metalwork and decorative metalwork. Whereas the Pope at that time, because they had destroyed the Crusader state, put an embargo on any products coming from Egypt, which is why they made a deal with the Venetians to slide it out there. So as you can see for this one, we've now got a lot of counted work. So the pattern darning, we've also got pulled stitches, cut work, as well as the pattern darning that's popping up there. Oh, and Gobelin stitch, which is a like a slanted filling stitch. So that's what I've just been talking about. So they set up the royal embroidery workshops, and from there they created the tiraz and the gift of coats that were very highly sought after. Out of that, the robes of honors, they also had the great honor of doing the kiswa cover of the Kaaba for the Hajj every year. Nowadays, it is done by the Saud royal family, as symbolic of their status. It was that kind of thing. So it's very high status. There are other workshops that popped up of professionals, and they did a lot of bespoke work. Some of the items that we get mentioned in the Cairo Geniza, which discusses wedding trousseaux of the Jews and what they were buying and selling, does talk about embroidered garb. So eventually what happened is life intrudes with plague. So not just then, but now, they had the Black Plague come through in waves. They think in the end, it hit about 3 times massively, and they think that they managed to reduce the population down by a full third, which is a lot. By that stage, too, the government had a lot of growing corruption. And so you had the Circassian Mamluks rise up against the original Burji Mamluks and kick them out. Although in the end, there were still high amounts of corruption, and unfortunately, it did change a lot of things. They closed down the royal embroidery workshop and outsourced it to someone they knew. And from there, the quality of the embroidery fell. And so you had a lot of workshops close. So there were, of course, stuff embroidered into Egypt, imported into Egypt as well as being exported. This one here was made in either Anatolia or Syria, which is absolutely lovely. And it's very Chinese in its design. As you can see, you've got dragon heads embroidered in silk. But no specific site was actually recorded as to where it was found. The Mamluk popularity, not only did it have freehand designs as well as the counted, but you've got scroll work, trefoils, birds, trees, you've had medallions, hearts are another one, triangles, diamonds, filfets, which is now also we know now as the swastika. They didn't do it just to get people upset nowadays, but as well as other types of floral designs that popped up. This one here. Okay, so this one, part of a tunic. Not quite sure which part, because almost everyone nowadays is, once they find something, they have a tendency to cut off the boring bits. So the plain parts end up being discarded, but the shiny embroidered bits stick around. Okay, so the bottom band is reversible, which is specifically this part here. These ones are not, because you're looking at floating items. Okay, so as you can see, the market is very broad. We have crosses on here, and these are Maltese crosses. So Malta is an island off in the Mediterranean, which means, of course, that they were exporting to there, and they were certainly creating items for sale to those people who would want it. However, this was found apparently in Fustat like everything else. So counted floral work. So as I mentioned before in previous ones, the Ashmolean has a tendency to say 10th to 15th century. This is because they have thousands of items, which, yeah, they haven't carbon dated. Likelihood is, stylistically, it's very Mamluk, very counted. Perhaps even you're looking at later period ones, maybe 15th to 16th century here. But yes, it's not carbon dated, so they do a very broad range. Some of the freehand embroidery, as you can see, we've got some flowers there, and but it's not a split stitch, it is a form of double chain stitch. Okay, and there's my speaker notes. I'm going to stop sharing that one. So does anyone have any questions?
What's double chain stitch?
Double chain stitch. Let me find that. I'm Googling it now. It's not actually something I do. So we've got modern ones. Yeah, there are a few out there. It's where the loopy bit it gets hooked onto the other one. So it gets double hook.
Okay. Guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you sort of go round and then down.
Well, instead of it circle hooking into the circle, so they're like that, they're actually next to each other. And yeah, so they hook into each other.
Okay.
Okay, so I will show you, what am I doing here? I'll show you my screen. This one is, it's taking forever. As you can see, it is a tunic. So what we've got here is a mix of counted work, filling stitch. We've got satin stitch there. And this one was also from a tunic. As you can see, birds are a popular one. The bird symbolism, it's how to show off wealth. Because let's face it, if you could eat and there were a lot of birds on the Nile, then you would never go hungry. Okay. Oh, hang on. Sorry about this. I'm having trouble getting to all of my links. Okay, so this is a sampler. So this is what one of the professionals would have made in their workshop. So someone can come along and say, I would like that. Now they put them on towels, they put them on furniture, they put them on handkerchiefs, they put it on clothes, they put it on water jug covers, they put it on practically everything. It was definitely a form of wealth. If you could have something that had embroidery on it, then yes, you could. Now I have charted this one, which you can see on my blog. There you go. You can see from...
I should distract you, Miriam. There is a question in the chat from Aya asking, was this embroidery something everyone would do and wear, or only for skilled artisans and the wealthy?
To be very honest, the professionals, there were certainly professionals out there, over 40 workshops in Cairo alone. So yes, there were professionals. If you could do it on your own, then great. But where would you get the silk from? So it's all about the wealth. And if you could sew, then obviously you'd try to also make money from it. Now, this particular sampler, as you can see, it's mostly pattern darning. But this at the bottom, we've got counted work, which has also got pulled stitches in there. Now, this one I've also charted. Sorry, guys. Okay. Yes, there are excellent examples of samplers in Anne Ellis's work. That's one of the things that has led me into it. Those works are in the Ashmolean Museum, which I'd highly recommend going through because there's a wonderful HD zoo. As you can see by me showing you this one, which is the Ashmolean itself. There you go. Now this is likely to have been a tunic. So let's see how we go for this one. And yes, what you're looking at there is tiraz all over. Let's see, does it? It's actually not Mamluk though. It's a bit too early. That's what I get for paying attention. But if you have a look at the zoom, you can see it's done in satin stitch. I will, however, there we go. So a lot of the tunics that we find nowadays are actually children's tunics, normally found on bodies. Children's tunics were cut down versions of the adult ones, and the amount of time it would have taken to do something like this, they were obviously of wealth. And as you can see, we've got a lot of trefoils here with scroll work, and it wouldn't surprise me if it is just split stitch, but it looks like a whole lot of different stitches all thrown together. But I personally love the little loops and the buttons. It's not every day you get to see the loops and the buttons still on something. And you can see that the neckline is also a bit more square instead of a round or an oval shape.
I'll just say we've got more questions in the chat. I'll just summarize them. Sure. So Jenny asks, but surely if the poor are making their own clothes, then rather than silk, they would embroider with linen instead. And there's a follow-up question from Aya asking if there were less costly or less ornate versions that the general public would use.
Let me show you another type of tunic that we've got. Can you see that one? That one has been stamped. And you can see there's the neckline there, and there would have been the slit at the front. So it's an Indian block print. So that's another one that came through. There actually hasn't been a lot of linen embroidery that has remained. There is some cotton that has come through, but cotton in the end is actually as expensive as silk because it was being exported from Afghanistan and India at the time. So, sorry, I keep bouncing up and down. Yes, ordinary people can be decorated, but don't forget when people were making their trousseaux, you're talking about them making the clothes that they would keep for the rest of their lives. They would be their shiny wedding clothes that, you know, if they kept, they could then hand on. So yes, that's why we hear about it being embroidered or decorated at least. And yes, they also used not necessarily gold thread, but they certainly had a lot of silver thread as well. So, and silver thread wrapped around a silk core is very expensive. I'm not sure if some of it was coming out from Syria, because don't forget we had a lot of wars going through, as well as, yeah, I do know that Afghanistan certainly took off in their cotton export. So I can show you what kind of garb I've made. I don't think my phone is working happily for me to sign me in, but I will do this. Okay. So the Mamluks were a little bit more regimented against non-Muslims. Specifically, they really didn't like Christians. And so there were definite rules and regulations that were quite heavily enforced. The Christian people there had to wear blue headwear, and the Jews had to wear yellow, which is why I've made myself a yellow scarf here. And I have put on there a fish. So it's made out of silk. It's very, very similar to Bayeux stitch. So what you're looking at is an outline of stem filled in with satin, and then there's a holding stitch with a picot over the top. This one is based on an actual textile. You can see that in the Ashmolean. It's also in Ellis's book. I really wasn't too sure about what it was as a stitch until I started learning Bayeux stitch myself. Now, this is one of my earlier Mamluk garb, as you can see there, and I sewed it directly onto the tunic itself. Now, this one is the hand scrolling, the scrolls and the trefoils, and on the arms where you normally put tiraz, etc. There is that, which is one of the items that I first charted many years ago. Yes, this part was the one that took forever. So another one of the earlier garb that I had made also has actual tiraz on there. So this one is a form of cross stitch. And yes, it is different on the other side. One of them is good fortune. It just repeats like 7 times. And another one says, patience is blessed with success and everyone gets rewarded, which is always something I think everyone should be aware of. Now, this I made for my elevation to the laurel gear. You can see here, it's got silver and on the arms. Not that I am aware of, Eva. I believe it was all about what you could afford. And, oh, sorry, this one I created for my stepping down gear. As you can see, my lovely birdies, and just decorated sleeves, which I had based from a sampler that I had charted, which was, and then I did it all. Ta-da! Everyone needs a sampler. This is the one earlier that was mentioned that had leaked color everywhere. So as you can see around the green, it's got a bit of a halo. So yeah, I can't believe how much color it leaked. So I've already gone through everything. Any questions?
What I'll do is I'll turn off the recording so that people can speak freely. I'll just do that now.